All right, well, and I think it's time to start. Welcome, everybody. This webinar is recorded, so we just want to tell you that everybody knows that. It comes from BELTA in Belgium. That's the Belgian English Language Teachers Association, and members of BELTA can watch the recordings on our website. We are very happy today to welcome Rose Bart. So welcome, Rose. Rose has been teaching English in private language schools since 1998. And like BELTA's president, James Taylor, she is also a mentor at ITDI, and that's the International Teacher Development Institute. Rose is very active online through Twitter, Facebook. She has a blog, and also, of course, in the ITDI community. She has a passion for teaching and learning, and that led her to pursue a major in pedagogy with emphasis on early childhood education. She has been working as an English educator for the past 7 years for SATC School, and that's a great educational institute in the south region of Brazil. She works in a language center with all levels and all ages. She loves learning from and with other teachers, and she's also very interested in online professional development and the role of technology in order to enhance authorship and language learning through a process of dialogue. Her webinar today is about listening, and she promised us that she will suggest some practical ideas to promote better listening results and thus more engagement with the learning of English, both inside and outside the classroom. So Rose, I give the word to you for the next hour. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you, BELTA, for giving me this opportunity. The webinar, for me, is always a place to share my journey and also my reflections. So I hope that I can really do this today by sharing with you my journey, understanding how listening works in the classroom, and this dialogical process, and how does it, happen for the second language learner when you're learning another language. Listening with both ears, as you can see, it is about actually listening with attention, but also being able to make sense, to understand not just the language that you hear, but also the context, and with the aim, of course, to understand each other, right? Because this is what it's all about, communication. Here's a picture of my son, Emmanuel, who is 4.5. And I would like to start with a couple of anecdotes in first language acquisition. When Emmanuel was born, he was actually tested. He had his ears tested to check if he had any hearing problems. Not because there was actually any problem at all, but that's actually standard procedure nowadays here. The babies have to come out of the hospital with their ears tested. And the doctor who tested my son's hearing, she was explaining to me that can prevent, a lot of problems for the future, and they can work on earlier on in case the child is born with any kind of hearing problem. Luckily, Emmanuel didn't. No, he wasn't born with anything. His hearing was perfect, and she actually warned us about taking care of this in his first years. That was when I started, together with my studies in pedagogy, in first language acquisition, and Emmanuel being born. That was when I started to really pay attention to a lot of things. and hearing was one that really, um, you know, really makes a lot of sense to think about, because through hearing, the inputs of hearing, you learn. And this was something that the doctor stressed to us. We really need to take care of his hearing because he needed it for learning to speak and learning other things in his life. Um, and there was a second thing that happened recently, actually 2 weeks ago. And Emmanuel was going around the house repeating a sentence. And in this sentence, he I couldn't understand what he was saying in Portuguese, because Emmanuel is bilingual and English is his first language. He speaks English very well. He interacts with any kind of media. He watches movies for kids, any sort of cartoons, and he always discusses that with us, and he can even repeat it perfectly. But when it comes to Portuguese, there is always a little bit of problem. He sounds foreigner to people. Although he was born in Brazil, both parents are Brazilian, our language supposed to be Portuguese, but for him it is English. And he doesn't really get much of opportunity to speak in Portuguese, because most of the time we are English anyway. And he doesn't go to school yet. We decided to leave him at home. So a couple of weeks ago, when he was repeating this sentence he heard from his daddy and his sister, they recorded a sentence to post in the WhatsApp group for the family, and Emmanuel was repeating it, and I couldn't understand what he was saying. Then my husband, he explained to me. Everybody was laughing because it was cute, mispronouncing everything. And my husband explained to me that they recorded it to post in the families group and so on. And cute as it looked, because it was really cute. He sounding foreigner and mispronouncing some sounds in Portuguese. For me, it was like an alert that something was not okay with his development in Portuguese. So I did actually what any teacher would do. I think it's a bad luck for Emmanuel, or a good luck for him, that he has a mother who is a teacher. And this is actually the sentence he was trying to say, "Oh, Vierada, gente boa." You probably don't, you're not going to understand this, first of all, because you don't know the language. Second of all, you might be able to make sense of some syllables, some parts of it, but not really the meaning if you haven't studied Portuguese or if it's not your first language. I don't know if Christina actually, if Christina heard it, she would probably, understand easily. But I have it written in the PowerPoint, so she will know it anyway. And what I did with Emmanuel was to work on the pronunciation. It took me like 5 minutes to just take him aside and then repeat. First, to make the segmentation by separating the parts. And I worked in the first thought group, or virada, and I separated in syllables and made sure that he could understand the sounds of each one, and working like in the sound he had the most difficult with, the phoneme, there was ra. And then I worked in the second thought group, gente boa, and then again he had a trouble with one very specific phoneme, that was the b, and he was saying like g. And then after I made sure that he could understand the parts, we worked on blending it slowly. Yes, Cristina. Vieira is the last name of the family. And that's my husband called the family. And after blending, working on the blending for him to understand, then we worked on the intonation and the stress for him to talk as natural as possible. Um, I know this for a child, this is not really what he needs. What he needs is more exposure to Portuguese through stories, through reading with him, so he can get as good in Portuguese as he got as good in English. But this exercise was a very simple exercise I did with him. It didn't take more than 5 minutes. And next day, I tested him by asking him to repeat after me in a normal speed, intonation, and he did. And then 2 days ago, I did it again. I tested him again to check if that exercise worked out, and it did. A week later, I did it again, and I asked him to repeat to check. Week later, it wasn't as good, but it was much more clear than it had been the first time he tried to pronounce. So I'm not even sure that the concepts of virada, gente, and boa, the three words present in his utterancy, makes any sense to him yet. Um, Maybe not. So it doesn't really, it doesn't really give us much information about, like, for second language learning. Of course not. But I just want to use this anecdote to show you the importance of hearing, and hearing in order to learn. We all know that in second language learning, it's so important to work on pronunciation in all aspects of pronunciation. So my first point is about pronunciation. You need to teach students to listen to the sounds, listen to blending the sounds in a way that it really makes sense. Repeating over and over, it doesn't seem to be really helpful. As a language learner myself, it doesn't work for me. I can't really pick it up sounds easily. I have to break it down. So just an anecdote and just an example to show the importance of working it with the students. My second point is actually if you don't make sense of what you can hear, and you really can't get the content of what somebody's trying to transmit to you, it will be very hard to try even to listen to the person. And one of the things that I like is to think that the aim in the classroom is to promote understanding, not just to what students hear, read, but also to what the students hear. Make sure that they understand us. I'm going to play a short clip of Everybody Loves Raymond. It's a very nice TV show. And they talk about active listening. So let's watch. We all know that even if we have a common language, it's still listening to the other person and listening in order to understand. It's a challenge, right? It's really challenging. Active listening, I use this technique in my class, you really have to listen, you have to feel, you have to look at the person. But apart from using it to solve conflicts and give feedback sessions in my class, this concept of acknowledging the person, acknowledging what the person, make sure that I understand what the person is trying to tell me, want to tell me. I also use it as a language tool. Restating, rephrasing, especially when you are dealing with low low-level students. You know, it's a very, if you want to keep English going in the class, and you have to make sure that what they are saying, you know, when they are, I'm not talking here about exercises, class exercise. I'm talking about the moments of sharing the class, and moments where you promote tasks where students can give their opinion, um, you know, share the ideas, even talk about things that happen to them. You need to create this environment where communication is a necessity. Of course, in a monolingual classroom, it's very hard for students to talk to each other if they can speak to each other in the same language. But I make sure that I create this moment where students have to talk to me in English, but I give this support. It's not correcting time. It's about listening to them, listening to their ideas, listening to their experience, acknowledging it. And I try to use this also in feedback practice with my group. So they give their feedback, when they give me feedback about the teaching, the class, the activities, I also try to use English with them. I also use this technique where they can, I can acknowledge what they are saying, and I restate what they said, so I can make sure that I really follow their thoughts, and everybody in the room can really listen. And this is another thing that I think is very important. When somebody is talking, everyone has to stop and listen. So I make sure that every student, if it is a class conversation, everyone stop. Let's come down. Let's listen to what this person is saying. You know, it's important, and we need to listen. So you need to create this environment where there is a necessity to communicate. And um, and I use the board a lot for this moment, you know. So it's like, okay, so is this what you're saying? Cool, this is really nice. Okay, can you talk more about this? I'm really interested to learn more about this. And everybody is attentively listening to this interaction between the other students and me. So active listening is one tool that I use in class communication, um, through restating, rephrasing, and it really helps because you acknowledge the other person. Um, Now, my point in this webinar is to engage, right, in listening, to understand language, to understand content, and to understand each other. Common sense will tell us that if you can't understand what the person is saying, you can't really communicate. Unless you are going to a country and you want to eat and you go to McDonald's. That's kind of universal, right? You go there, you point to the menu, you say the number you want, and then it's easy. But in the classroom, things are not that easy. Communication is something that you really have to foster to become real. Um, I really liked this definition of listening, that is making sense of oral input, and it takes effort. That's something that Brown stresses in his book. It takes effort. And we have to use our knowledge of individual pieces of language, like sounds, words, grammatical patterns, in concert with our knowledge of the topic, situation, in context to arrive an understanding of what is being transmitted to us. And I really like all the definitions. I checked, you know, I've been reading the last couple, listening. It, it, you know, it takes in consideration all the aspects and also the purpose why we listen. We need to listen to understand. But in order to do that, we really need to make sense of this oral input. And if I say something in Portuguese, a language you're not learning, if it's not your first language, you're not going to understand if I'm speaking in Portuguese. So sometimes we forget in the classroom that lower level students, especially for lower level students, the bottom-up process is quite important to prepare them to understand the message, even instruction, and so on. So I'm stressing these 3 points, that without understanding the language they hear, they speak signals, you're not going to understand the context, and then you can't really understand each other. There is this dilemma between L1 and L2. My pedagogy studies focus on, since 2008, I've been delving into pedagogy, and the literacy is actually my field of study, coordinated with my second language teaching, English teaching. And one of the things that we actually study when it comes to literacy is the importance of reading. And somehow reading has taken over, written language has taken over oral, spoken language. And in the classroom, we tend to focus more on written language than spoken language, even though there is a lot of speaking going on. I don't know if you guys actually can follow my what I'm trying to say. That we all know actually there is difference between first language acquisition and second language acquisition. I'm quite aware of that, and but one thing is true. First language acquisition, you focus first on spoken language. When a person learns to read and write, they have already mastered speaking and listening spoken language. So the only thing that happens is they have to connect sound with the written word. And it's quite natural, for that. But when it comes to L2, the students have like a lot of challenges. They have to learn how the words sound, how the meaning of it, and how it is written. Is at least 3 aspects just for the word. It does not even count for the sentence and whatever they have to listen, like real communication. So there is so much going on for the second language learner. But in L1 literacy, there is oral language skills developed to a fairly high level prior to development of written language. And this is in any language. We learn to speak, we listen, we have a very vast vocabulary, and oral and written essentially have the same lexicon and syntax, essentially. The beginning, and the beginning readers, they draw their knowledge of oral language to learn to read. And this really started challenging my assumptions about what was happening in my classroom with the students, my own students. Yeah, I totally agree, Fabiana. In our school, we don't have this problem actually. When students get to a level of proficiency, an intermediate level, they all are willing to speak, and they do have a lot of things to develop until they can become, more and more proficient. But speaking only have, we only encounter problems with the student having difficulty to be willing to speak in a group when they are lower level. And usually it's because they get, anxious, not just about afraid of making a mistake, but sometimes they can't even understand what the teacher is saying, and they can do exercises in the books. They can follow the exercise, but when you have conversations, it's really challenging for them. So in our school, we don't have encountered this problem. What I have observed is low proficiency students. They are the ones who have the most time in conversation. So, scaffolding, working on these matters is really important before we can actually, not that we cannot make conversations. I do conversations with my beginner learners. I don't have any problem with them to start, but we need to respect their development in the second language as well. And we have to be patient, and we have to scaffold. We have to find ways where we can make them, ensure that they can actually communicate themselves. Last year, I gave a webinar that I talked about the importance, for example, for students to have time to put down their thoughts, to make sure that they knew how to express themselves, and then they could read it out to the class. This is also a way of, helping them not being so anxious and nervous. They are still participating in the communication, but we scaffold it in a way that it makes sure that students have a chance also to speak their own ideas in the class. So my, I want us to think a little bit about literacy and how different, it is for reading and listening to start off. And why do learners spend more time on reading than listening? Now, why do you think? Would you like, please, to discuss in the chat box why the students actually spend more time with reading materials and with printed material instead of really listening to English? I'm going to take some time. I'd like to interact a little bit in the chat box. Let me see what's going on here. And I would like to listen, to read your responses here. So why do learners spend more time reading than listening? Why that happens? Easier to prepare a reading activity for teachers. Okay. More tangible. It's not so scary. Nice responses. Reading is easier. A lot of people will agree that it is easier. Students may feel more in control when they read and therefore more comfortable. Easier to measure student progress in a reading activity. Okay. Can read if necessary. Rai says, I believe students prefer reading over listening due to the fact that they can do it more at their own pace rather than having to keep up with listening. Easier because it can be slowed down. Doesn't involve much attention. A lot of great responses. And all that you have said agree what Brown have registered in his book. Yeah, having their own tempo, their own time. No pronunciation involved. The spelling is a clue to meaning. Transfer with other languages. Don't need to expose themselves. Listening is like dancing. Read is more like the music only. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much for the great responses. Of course, this webinar is not really about teaching you much of anything, but to remind us of the importance of listening for learning. And also, if you want to create a room where there is conversations, we need to take in consideration that listening has to be a great part of it. Teaching, not testing, as we usually say. So a few things that Brown is going to say about it is students can skim a text quickly to get a good idea what it's about, but listeners can't skim. It's that. The language of them must be done in real time. There is no second chance unless, of course, the listening specifically asks for repetition. Um, if the learner is in the target language country, in the country they are trying to learn the language, we have so many cues, and it's listening. We pick it up listening with time. I lived in England, in 6 months I could make some basic communication without any problem. I lived in Egypt, and also in 6 months I could, having, um, uh, you know, short conversations, nothing too formal, nothing too deep, but it was possible to go to buy something at the store, to the market. It was easy because we have a lot of cues that helps us. And also I asked the people specifically to help me, to teach me while I was in these countries. So it's quite different from classroom, and we have to think about this, I believe. Another thing is that Brown states that are different. Cognates, like somebody mentioned, that is easy by the spelling because it's similar to our language. So it means that we can recognize because of the cognate. And but they sound different. So like I can read and understand, and then when I listen, it doesn't really come easy to me unless the person explains. So that happens a lot in our classrooms. It's different, but what I have observed in my own practice years ago is I was expecting students to do with listening what they were doing with reading. But as they are different skills, although they seem similar, we need to work with them in class to teach differently. For example, listening needs pronunciation work, needs bottom-up process. Teaching in class need to do activities where they can really connect sounds, speech to written words and written text. Last year, there were a lot of blog posts and people talking about listening. And I read a post by Carol Goody. And one thing that stood out in her post to me was an essential element. However, among other things that we have to think in the classroom, is there more than just making students repeat words and repeat work with grammar. What is there? There is more to it. Yes, there is. And one of the things that Carol points out is an essential element, however, must be that learners develop an understanding of how the language is used in different contexts and for different purposes by reading and listening to what and how things are written or said in their language. And I totally agree with Carol because we cannot create all kinds of genre, even in reading and listening, in the same way. A person going to the supermarket and to have a dialogue is different from reading a story, or for listening to a story, or for watching a movie, listening to a song. Any kind of text, written or spoken, they are different. They have different purpose. We need to think of them in a different way. Some of the activities that my students found really useful to develop their listening, to make sense, as Brown say, of the oral input, they were receiving in class through recording or through movies, songs, or, even me speaking to them. It was listening transcribed. Listening transcribe is actually a technique that I learned from John Fancello about back in 2012, and I have been trying, to get my students to not just try to do this in classroom, but I train them in class, and some students have already said they start doing this outside the class. Listening transcribe is a quite simple task. They have to hear and then transcribe what they hear. In classroom instructions, I use two techniques. The listening transcribe. Listening transcribe would be me giving the instructions and asking them, after I finish giving the instruction, for them to write down what they understood. And that means this is not scripted. It's like, how am I going to give the instruction? That's how it comes out. If they ask me to repeat again, I'll do it again as a normal communication, like happens. And then they write. After they finishing writing down what they thought they understood, and then we can work on the board to check if they understood it correctly. And on the board, we're going to work on the information, on the content, but also language. And when I do it as I dictate the instruction, then I'm going to do as in a dictation. I say the sentence or the thought group in a normal speed, and I give them time to write down. I repeat it again, not word by word. I repeat it, the thought group, in a normal speed as possible. So they have to make sense of what they hear, and they have to write down. I try to, when you work with course books, the instructions are already there. But when you have a chance to work, create your own lesson, your own activity, or in a moment, I suggest you that you actually do it, create like just a small activity to work on this listening aspect, instead of you slowly explaining it. Use the listening transcribe technique or the dictation technique, to work on really on the oral, for them to make sense of the oral input. And with the dictation, at the end, I use the same thing. I use the board a lot, but I don't write on the board. I do it first with the listening. If I just said and then I give the answer, it wouldn't be much use. But as they have to connect with the written language by writing down themselves, it becomes an activity in itself. And also in correction time, I don't correct writing on the board. I dictate the answer. Also by respecting the thought group, So if I have to say a sentence, I will say the first thought group. I'll give them time to check, and then the second, then the whole sentence again. And sometimes they say, excuse me, could you repeat it again? How do you spell this word? How do you spell that word? And then I work on spelling. Sometimes they have, in our classroom, we have spelling, the alphabet with the spelling. So sometimes they don't know, or when they hear, they are looking not at me, but on the top of the board. So so they can connect to the spelling sound. And I use this kind of activities a lot because it's like part of the class routine, you know, now. Another activity is the reading lookup. Students, you can pair up students and they can listen to one student. They have like a short text, you know, like just few sentences, something that even they can produce themselves. And then one reads two, three sentences and cover, and both of them write it down. And they do it until they finish the passage. After that, they compare the answers. And after they compare and they discuss, you know, what is missing there, then they can check with the written passage. That's another way of working on trying to connect speech signals to written language. And the dictogloss is quite a famous, you know, I think lots of people, you know, nowadays talk about dictogloss. In pairs, the students, we read the passage, and then students take notes, and after that, they try to make sense of it together, they discuss, and they reconstruct the text. So those four activities, they became part of our class, but listening, transcribing, dictation is about everything that we do when it comes to correction, you know. So it's not about correcting their mistakes. It's about actually sending them the message that it's important to make sense of what you're hearing, you know, and connect the two together. So, and their feedback, I have a blog post that's actually with the same title of this presentation, and my students' feedback was actually, let's do more of this. This was like when the first time I used the listening, transcribe, and dictation techniques with them. They really liked it and found them useful. Another thing that I also do in class is it's actually a kind of I learned this. It's a version from Reading Lookup from what I read from John Scansalo, Breaking the Rules book, and from his webinars in 2012. My students, with the course book, actually, I do this because the course book, they always have these wonderful questions for them to practice. But what I noticed also is students read, they don't speak it. So it became also part of our class routine for students to, they can look down, mentally read the question, then they have to look up, face their partner, and then say it. And if they can't say, the beginning is very difficult for them, even beginners. But with, you know, couple of tries, they will see that it's not a big deal. They can do it. If they stop in the middle of it to look again, to read again, that means they have to go back to the beginning. So I pay attention when students are interacting in pairs, asking and answering questions. I always remind them that they have to take a look, hold it in their memory, and then they look at the partner and they ask it. And the partner automatically, when they start doing it, you know, making, really facing each other to make a real conversation, the answer also, it has to be, you know, automatic. They have to make sense of what they are hearing and not read. That's also the partner sometimes. They are not listening. They are just reading, following, like the partner is just reading the questions out to them. And that's not what we want them to be able to really, even if it's just a question and answer, they really emulate like they are having a conversation. I think it is a simple one. So this technique, it's part of our class routine as well. Every time they have a course book, they have to do it. And after a month, of weeks of doing this, I just give them like the signal. Okay, you know the drills. Just go ahead. I student, if they find the sentence, the question to be too long, they they're going to try. They say, "Oh, this is hard," and then I say, "Okay, let me see if I can do it. If I can do it, you can do it," and I will do it, and they usually can do it. It's not really a problem. I've done this for the last 2 years, and it's really beneficial. And with time, they realize it too, and they start doing it automatically. So this is another technique I use for connecting, speech to written form, and also create this dialogical process when you're really listening to the other person. You really want to listen to the person. So to wrap up, actually, we are 10 minutes away, so I'm about to wrap up my presentation. And just going back again, then my point is, if you don't understand, if you're not making sense of what you hear, the language, you can't really get the content. And if you can't get the content, you can't really understand each other. Before we go to the almost the last slide, I would just like to remind you that research tells us today that reading comprehension will happen in reading if the students or the person understands 98%, 95 to 98, but 98 is better, of course, 95 to 98% of the words, if they are able to recognize and recall meaning of words and chunks. And otherwise, comprehension will not happen. So if for reading that is easier, even for reading that it's less challenging than listening, and you have the time to reread again, there is this necessity of really knowing what is there while listening. We haven't really taken this into account. Why we just use listening classroom most of the time to compensate with the teaching students, strategies to compensate for the lack of comprehension. We going back to Brown, what Brown says, top-down process is just as important as bottom-up process. So if the two processes are important, we need to give equal attention to them. Another thing that I found by reading about listening was actually that listening, to make sense of the listening, learners have to not just be able to understand, but they have to listen attentively. They have to listen with the aim to understand the other person's messaging. So my idea is listening with both ears is to really listen for the message, and with the aim to really understand the person and actively. Now, to close my presentation, I hope I haven't left anything out because I had so much to say, and I'm like struggling with the time here. If I have, I'm sure I'll make a summary of the talk again in a blog post. And if I have left anything else, I'll make sure I in the blog post. And I would like to invite you to see active listening in action with Raymond and his wife Debbie.
Believe this.
Why did you do this, Allie? This is terrible.
Oh, great!
This is Michael's giraffe. He's crying now. Why did you do this?
Cause.
Cause is not an answer.
Active listening.
Ray, that doesn't work.
It works. I just use it on the worst kids in the neighborhood.
Would you?
Having any
Believe this.
Why did you do this, Allie? This is terrible.
Oh, great!
This is Michael's giraffe. He's crying now. Why did you do this?
Cause.
Cause is not an answer. Ray, that doesn't work.
It works. I just use it on the worst kids in the neighborhood.
Would you? Look at this. Look what she did.
Just try it. Try it.
No, Ray.
I'll do it. You want me to do it?
No,
I'll do
no,
it.
no, no. Do it. Okay. Allie, let's talk about what you did.
I don't want to talk.
Are you feeling angry?
Reflect back.
You're angry.
Yes.
Okay. But it's not okay to rip up toys when we're angry.
Judgmental.
You are angry because
Because it used to be your toy.
oh,
Yes. I don't like Michael and Jeffrey.
I see. You think that Mommy and Daddy pay too much attention to Michael and Jeffrey.
Ray, okay, I was handling this.
They get everything.
Right, and you're upset because we gave them your old giraffe.
I still liked it.
But you weren't playing with it.
But that doesn't matter, though, because it was still yours. And you're mad because we gave it to Michael without asking you, right?
Right.
Well, Mommy and Daddy made a mistake. And everybody makes mistakes, right, Mommy?
Yes.
Do you feel better now, Allie?
Yes, can I have the giraffe?
Well, it's broken, honey.
I know, I want to try to fix it for Michael.
Uh-huh. They're sweet.
Thank you, Daddy.
See what I did there?
Yeah. Can't believe it. It's pretty amazing. You did it.
Anything else need taken care of while I'm around here?
No.
What? What's the matter?
Nothing with you, obviously.
Don't go by me. I'm a natural. Where you get it?
Oh, look.
What?
Don't act so proud of yourself. Listen, if I hadn't dragged you to that stupid class, you'd still be standing there going, hey, no TV.
You're feeling inadequate because I mastered it before.
Don't give me that active listening crap. Where do you get off listening to me?
Never happened again.
Thanks, Christina. I hope you guys have enjoyed, and thanks for coming.
Thank you very much, Rose. Are there any more questions, or people can always type them, as John said, in the box below, if we have any more questions. I would like to repeat that BELTA members can watch this webinar again on our website. where they can find all the webinars of the past 6 months. Yeah, okay, John, indeed, the handout can be downloaded from the left-hand corner.
The handout is links, really. All the links that you can make it easier for you to learn more, explore more about the coding activities. A lot of our PLN, they have written blog posts and a lot of interesting activities out there, ideas that we can use in our own classroom.
Okay. Thanks everybody for coming, and a big thank you, of course, to you, Rose, for this interesting webinar. Maybe I can just say that, as you can see on the slide, we invite you all to our next BELTA Day, which is on the 25th of April, 2015. And people can still send in their proposals to speak at BELTA Day. You can find all information about that on our website. The next webinar, as you can see, is in January, so we take a little break. Well, we don't take a break, actually. It's coming next month, the 18th of January, with Fiona Morklin, and she is probably going to talk, I'm almost sure, about using pictures when teaching English. Fiona is one of the founders and curators of ELT-PICS, and she will probably talk about using pictures in language learning. Oh yeah, okay, James, thank you. Yeah. Stills and stories, take a photo, and what you can do with pictures, yeah. So make sure that you can be there. I'm sure it's going to be absolutely great, interesting to get to know the ELT-PICS source resources and what you can do with it. Okay, thank you, Rose. Thank you very much. Have a nice afternoon. Okay, thank you. Okay, we can stop.